Well, I've wanted to write since I was very young. I first got introduced to literature really in the fifth grade.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, I had never read a novel, and my fifth grade teacher said, you should read this book. And he gave me a book, and he gave me another and another and another and another. And I fell in love with reading. And it was when I graduated the fifth grade, he gave me two things. He gave me a pen, and he gave me this book called um, Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein, and which is a book of poems. And um, it just kind of opened up a whole world for me, and I started writing. I always wrote bad poems with my Parker pen that he had given me, and it wasn't until I got into college where I read Elena Maria Viramontes, Rudolfo Anaya, Sandra Cisneros, of course, and that was in a Latino literature course, and I thought, wow, you mean all the things that I've been scribbling this whole time with my little Parker pen are actually valid, and that's when decided that I wanted to be a writer. Fast forward, I went to graduate school. I got my master's degree from Cal Arts, and shout out Cal Arts, in 1999, but it wasn't until 2019, so 20 years later, that I published The Moon Within, which is my first book. And yeah, so that just kind of opened the door, and publishing and my agent and Scholastic and now Penguin have been really wonderful to me, and have allowed me to tell these stories that I didn't see growing up, and that I'm trying to be of service and contribute to the community. So
Yeah, well, it's such a wonderful contribution because, like you said, for so many of us, we didn't have these stories growing up, and so now kids do. And I also love that you're paying tribute to your teacher who made such a difference, because I've been reading Land of the Cranes, which I hadn't read before, and there's a teacher that plays such an important role in helping Betita, the main character. And I just love that I think as adults sometimes we forget what an influence we can have on kids and helping guide them and telling them that their stories are valid. And speaking of which, because you do write for young people, but you write about some pretty serious issues, and like identity and social justice. Why is that so important to talk to young people about? Because of course there's a lot of debate about that, about what we should be talking to our kids about. Why do you think that's so important?
for a number of reasons. One, I write to fill in, as I said earlier, to provide stories that didn't exist before, to validate, to really kind of open and expand and turn readers onto these new possibilities, right? And in particular, their agency. And a lot of times I think children are silenced and erased, as are marginalized communities. And so trying to fill in those gaps and trying to address their real lives. They live in the world, right? And sometimes the world is very difficult. And I don't tend to write stories that are just, everything's terrible, even though everything is terrible, but I try not to leave children with that. I try to really kind of show them a little light at the end of the tunnel, a way outside, and how to rise above adversity. So for like in The Moon Within, it's through dance and connecting with community that this little girl kind of comes to understand how she can get out of her situation. In Land of the Cranes, it's through picture poems, and how self-expression is really important, how to speak your mind and make change, positive change strategies. And then in the Seat of the Sun, this one, the same thing. This little girl uses theater and singing as a way to kind of come out of a very difficult circumstance, and that's what I'm hoping to impart to readers. That even though it seems hopeless, even though that you might be drowning in the worst of times, you still have the power to do so much. And I think children are have like an incredible moral compass. They know what's right and wrong, and sometimes we silence them into not speaking out and against things that are difficult. So that's why I try always. It's dark, but also there's hope.
Right. Yeah, I would definitely say that in your books, there's always that thread about hope, which often can take the form of activism, sometimes even not intentionally, like in Land of the Cranes, where she does use art, the picture poems, but really just like you said, like a form of self-expression to try and help herself and the other people who are with her. But then it gets used, it becomes a way to actually change their situation. Or you talk about a seat in the sun with the theater. And I love how you've connected it in each case. It's a form, it's art.
Yes.
Right. It's self-expression is a way of really helping change the situation. And so this is all about, like you said, giving people a glimpse of hope. So what gives you hope with all the terrible things that are happening? What helps you stay connected to that? Would you say it's also maybe through art or?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Before I was an author, I was a poet. And I was involved in a lot of artist communities, organizing artists of color, really using art as a tool for social change. And when I was in my early 20s, we were in support of the Zapatista movement, and against 187, against the shutting down of affirmative action. All of these things were part of the epoch or the era that I was in, and as a young woman. And that taught me, that helped me understand that what we say and the cultural production that we bring to the world is part of activism. It's part of changing the narrative against whatever, whether that's capitalism or oppression or whatever. We have this tool, this really powerful tool to help make a change and make the world a better place.
Could you talk a little bit about why poetry, like I know Land of the Cranes is a novel in verse. I haven't had a chance to look at A Seed in the Sun because it just came out.
Yes.
I don't know if that is, but why did you choose to write it like that? That I don't know, with the verse and the poetry, why do you think that's so powerful as a way to connect with the reader?
Well, there's two reasons. One, because I began as a poet, mostly a poet, and did some installation and performance art and that sort of thing. But when I wrote The Moon Within, which is my first book, that came out in poetry. It didn't come out as a prose novel.
Right.
And I had been reading copiously with my children, and when I read The Red Pencil by Andrea Davis Pinkney, which I really loved, I went, wait a minute, here it is. This I could do this. This speaks to me. I can tell story through poetry, and absolutely. So that's kind of been my comfort zone. Though A Seed in the Sun, ironically, started in prose, and it was there are so many details, and it's historical fiction, so it was like a different vibe. But then, like 30,000 words in, I had to stop because I was like, there's no song. There's no song in this story. And my husband said, well, why don't you start writing it from this moment on? Write it as if in verse. And I tried that, and it was like really uncomfortable. And so I just scrapped the whole thing and started from the beginning. I kept the story, right? Like I knew what was going to happen, but
But still, that must have been a little scary to just start all the way over.
It was. It took much longer than I wanted it, but to get to that point. But then I went back and I went like, yes, this is my home. This is how I express myself. And that's not just, I mean, I write essays and I write, other fiction, short fiction in prose. But there's something about the power of poetry, the different tools that you can use to create imagery and figurative language and concrete poetry to like play with placement of the words. There's so many tools that the poet can use.
People haven't seen it. I mean, that was one thing that really struck me about Land of the Cranes is that it's not just that it's in verb, but that, like you said, even just where the words are placed on the page is so different.
Yeah. And the reason why I do that is because I want the words to perform. So if something is flowing, it kind of could like literally you could
Right.
flow. Or if it's a quiet moment, there's something in poetry called white space, right? Where you where it, like in Land of the Cranes, there are these really heavy moments, right?
Oh yeah.
Very intense moments. And if you notice, the very next poem is a haiku, or very small,
Mm.
because it allows for the reader to kind of take some space, to breathe, to assimilate, to not feel bombarded by, yet another scene.
Going to show another one. This is one of my favorites at the
Yes.
very beginning. And you just have that sense that it's called How I Learned to Fly. And you do have the sense of flying and how she's so happy with her
Yeah.
father. This is, of course, before everything changes. But I
Yes,
love
it
how
goes up and down, right? Like,
right.
and in A Seat in the Sun, I have this. I open up with the words kind of. I don't know if you could see it.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
they're picking. They're picking and in the fields, and their arched backs are right here.
Oh, wow.
And then the words go back and forth because there's a tornado, like a dirt devil, that hits them.
Mm.
And then she loses her voice, and at the very end, right here, she prays that it comes back. And so it's like, the space, just one line, and that's all you need to kind of give it this this importance.
Mm. And
So
I just want to mention, I don't know, I'm sure you're not able to see the comments as they're going by, but you got a really lovely comment saying Felicidades on your new book and also your recent birthday.
oh yes, I
Yes.
know, I turned 50.
Yay! But I
Yes,
wanted to
thank
go
you.
back to
Hmm.
the issue of immigration.
Hmm.
That's something that's very personal for you. And then,
Yeah.
of course, you also have one that's about workers' rights, like farm workers' rights. And what is it that you think? I mean, I think you've kind of written on two levels. One is for children who are going through this, and then other for maybe people who don't really, who haven't gone through it. What do you want for those who aren't as familiar with the issue, like say immigration, for example? What is it you want them to understand about what Betita experienced in the detention center and so on? And then for those who are going through it, what do you hope that they get out of the book?
Hmm. So yes, the story is super personal, on a lot of levels. I mean, of course, I've never been in detention, but I was brought into the United States as an infant, and my family came on a worker visa, and then my parents outstayed the visa, and so we were undocumented from the time the visa expired, which was like 6 months, to the time I was about 12 years old. And so we are part of an undocumented community and I grew up in an undocumented community, living in the shadows, really fearful of this idea of la migra,
Mhm.
and knowing that we were doing something that was not correct, or not considered correct, right? And being a little bit vilified, not as much because that was in the 70s, as it is now. but
Right.
but yeah, definitely, understanding that any kind of at any moment, we could be deported. So and when you grow up like that, that kind of stays with you, that identity stays with you. And so um I Land of the Cranes was inspired by before the when the Trump administration came into power, there they started attacking sanctuary cities. And so in Oakland, California, where I now live, there was a lot of raids that were happening. The governor at one point announced to the community, ICE is going to be doing raids. So the community was in terror. I mean, literal state sanctioned terror. And despite all of the warnings, the immigration came in, and they rounded up like 350 people. And they took them from work. They took them after they taking their kids to school, whatever. And so that was happening. And then also, um, there was this one story that like really stayed with me, and it's a farm worker couple. They had dropped their children off at school, and they were on their way to the fields when ICE gave chase. tried to make them stop. They fled, and they crashed in that,
Wow.
and they both died in that accident, and they left behind 6 orphan U.S. citizens.
Mm.
And that just killed me. All for what? Because they're here without authorization, which is a misdemeanor offense. It's not even a felony. It's not, it's a misdemeanor. The same, um, infraction that one gets by jaywalking, is the same as
Mm.
being here without authorization. So all of that was kind of like in my mind when I wrote Land of the Cranes. And what I hope people take away from it, I hope that the people who are undocumented and who've had this experience feel seen. In fact, I got to meet uh, some members of Sudu for Solidarity, which is this Japanese American organization that's helping to end detentions in the United States, because their community and some of the folks were actually detained themselves. So they're elder Japanese Americans who were fighting for all of the people who are coming into the United States right now and being detained.
Mm.
And so when she was, her name is, oh my God, I'm spacing her name right now, but when Satsuki read the book, she said, um, this is exactly what it was like
Mm.
to be in detention. This is what I felt. And so absolutely, I want people to see themselves in the book if this is their experience. But those who don't know about this, I want them to open their hearts and feel compassionate and know that we're doing the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing the wrong thing by detaining people for misdemeanors,
Mm-hmm.
treating them like criminals for misdemeanors. And
Right.
so, yeah, so that's a long answer to your question.
Well,
But
that's great. I'm not sure anybody could read the book and not come away with compassion for people who are going through it. And what about, just to switch gears a little bit, your new book, A Seed in the Sun? Do you want to talk more about that and what
sure.
inspired you to write that one?
Yeah, so this one, it wasn't an idea of mine, but it came from my editor, Nancy Mercado at Dial Books for Young Readers at Penguin, and she reached out with this question about like, hey, she had attended Dolores Huerta's 90th birthday, and she reached out to me because I think of my activist roots and because I write for middle grade. She said, have you ever thought about writing a book set during the pivotal moments of the United Farm Worker movement? And I was like, no, but let me try. I'm like, well, let's see. And so I immediately started just researching and like just a little bit embarrassed by all that I didn't know. Like, my goodness. And I just, for 2 weeks, and 2 weeks later, I had this idea as I was waking up, and this little voice was here. And that's when I started writing Lula's story. And Lula's story is about a 12-year-old girl who arrives with her farm working family to the Delano Delano in 1965, and they've just walked into a strike. The Filipinos have left the fields, and they're trying to kind of encourage the Mexican American Union, the National Farm Workers Association, run by Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez, to join them, because together they would be stronger. If all of the Mexican and the Filipino workers and the Arab and the Puerto Rican and all of the different Negro, and that's what they called them back then, but all of them came out, and so, but the Mexican American Union was the strongest, and so they did. And so the book takes place during that time. Her mom is ill. Her father is volatile. He's got a temper, and she has lost her voice. She's in this kind of like tornado whirlwind experience, and so it's all about her finding her voice and finding her place in the movement, and finding her way to within her place in the family. And yeah, it's all set and woven into all of the things that the farm workers experienced during that time, which is like, heat stroke and exploitation and yeah, and on and on and on. So that's essentially it.
Yeah,
I gotta get better about my pitch with that.
No, this is great. I mean, this is wonderful. Like I said, I've seen about the book, but I haven't been able to read it because it's so new, and it just sounds wonderful. I mean, what a great way into that story, which a lot of us have heard about, but like you said, there's so much that we really don't know about what happened and how it all came about. And just looking at the time, we are coming up on time, but I want to make sure we have time to talk about your other book, which is coming out, I think, in the spring, the Jovita wears. Where did I have?
Jovita wears pants, yeah, war pants.
Yes, spring 2023, because that looks, and it's a picture book, which is different. And this is your great aunt, right?
Yes, it is. It's my distant great aunt. She was my grandfather's cousin. So let me see if I can see it. That's her, right?
Wow.
Okay, y'all see her. But look at this. This is illustrated by Molly Mendoza. And it's I don't know if you can see that, but yeah. So I'm really proud of that story. She was my distant great aunt who dressed like a man and commanded a battalion of 80 men in the Mexican Sierras. And she was fighting for religious freedom. She was fighting for her family's honor. And this happened like 100 years ago. Wow. About close to 100 years ago. And so she, you know, at that time, women could not wear anything but skirts. And she defied all that. She was kind of like a tomboy and just loved being out in the countryside. And she used that knowledge of being connected to the countryside to fight in the countryside when the time came. So.
And did you grow up hearing stories about her? Or
sure. Absolutely. Yeah. My mom and dad knew me and my kind of feminism. And they said, you know, I had never met her because she was in Mexico and, you know, we were undocumented. So that was a whole thing that kept us apart. But we did, I did go to Mexico, but we never coincided. And it's one of the biggest regrets actually of my life. I don't have very many, but that, if not meeting Jovita while she was alive.
Oh, well, I can't wait until that one comes out. If for everyone who's watching, you should go out and get A Seed in the Sun, and we will watch for Jovita Wears Pants when it comes out in the spring.
Yes. Can I also tell you about another book that's coming? Wait. Oh, excuse me. Where's my?
That's all right.
Sorry. Okay. It's this book, Calling the Moon.
Yes.
I know. It's 16 period stories from Black, Indigenous people of color and authors, and it's got some great people like Guadalupe Garcia McCall, Sadia Faruqi, Nikki Grimes, Leah Henderson, Christina Suntervat, Padma Venkatraman, Ibiza Boy, Erin Entrada Kelly, so on.
That's amazing. Thank you for mentioning that. I forgot to ask about that.
Yeah, that's okay.
A lot of buzz about it.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And I edited it with my very good friend, Jamile Said Mendez. And so we were really excited about that. These both come out in March.
Nice.
Like a lot of women's history empowerment.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was so fun to talk to you. I really admire your work, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much. And for those of you who are interested tonight in Los Angeles, I think we're going to be streaming. If you go to my stories, you'll see there's going to be an event in celebration for A Seed in the Sun, and I'll be in conversation with Jennifer Torres, who wrote this book, Lola Out Loud. Which is about the story of Dolores Huerta. And so we'll be talking about Dolores' legacy tonight. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks, everybody.